Is everybody here to learn how to program apps for Facebook?
No, we're just here to see you.
Yeah, that happens a lot. I'm very popular. So good afternoon. My name is Snider, and I am here to talk about how you program apps for Facebook. You know, programming apps for Facebook is an interesting and challenging and exciting sort of thing to do. Yes?
I'm the only person on the planet who's going to ask this, but roughly, what is a Facebook?
Why would I tell you?
I
You know, get out of my class. I'm sorry, proceed with your question.
roughly, what is a Facebook app?
So, that's a very good question. So what is a Facebook app? A Facebook app is a website or Java application or Flash something that takes advantage of the APIs that Facebook provides and allows you to get access to their various elements of their infrastructure. So, for instance, you can log in with Facebook. You can use Facebook Authentication. If you log in, Facebook will provide you authorization, deauthorization, an opportunity to provide authorization, deauthorization, callback when a customer authorizes or deauthorizes your app. It allows you to do really annoying things like post notifications in their little pop-up button up there, as well as annoy everybody they know with comments on their news feed. Why one wants to write a Facebook app varies, but basically it's for the same reason that one writes any piece of open source, which is to say you want to get out there and get people using your stuff for whatever reason. Now, when I first posted this class, start off with this. When I first posted this class for Code Camp, it was possible to write and run a Facebook application for free. You can no longer do that. And that's not because Facebook charges you for it. That's because Facebook requires you to provide an HTTPS URL for your application or web page. Now, there are many places which will host you for free. I have not yet found a site which offers free HTTPS capabilities. And that's where it gets very challenging. And the reason for that is simple. If you're buying, like, I got a free instance at AWS, and it doesn't cost me anything to have a server up and running in AWS. That's very nice, and I can install an HTTPS certificate on that. The problem is they do not give me unlimited bandwidth for free. So the single most important thing you will want to consider when you're developing your Facebook app is how much bandwidth your customers are going to consume, how you are going to monitor it, and how you are going to pay for it. This class will answer none of those questions. Facebook, we all presumably know about Farmville and various popular Facebook games in which people pay actual money for virtual toys, much like World of Warcraft, I think, is the best one where you pay actual money for World of Warcraft toys. That's one of the ways in which you can monetize your application. You can also, you may want to have an application or a web applet application that, for instance, keeps track of the scores of your bowling team. If you're tracking your bowling team scores, then only your bowling team co-members are going to be on it, and your bandwidth probably is not going to exceed what you get from your provider. If your game or application becomes popular, you run a terrible risk of finding yourself with a very surprising bill. So that's one of the things to keep your head up about. And it's also one of the things you want to take into account when you're writing your application. Now, Facebook apps actually come in 3 flavors. The first 2 are pretty well known to everybody, I think. We've all seen, you go here, go to Facebook, you've got some application running, you click on it, This is the other little thing about Facebook, which is, and your application comes up in here. This is an iframe in which your application is placed. And the rest of this is provided by Facebook. The contents of the iframe, now Facebook makes a differentiation. They have what they call web applications, or they have Facebook applications. Now, this is actually a Facebook application, but it is a web page. So the difference between a web app and an application is thinner than one might think. It appears that if you're writing Flash, you can make this window be the size of your Flash screen and it will start Flash. But I could not figure out how to make a Java applet start automatically without having a web page and either the web start or the applet launch. So those are the first things, the web app and then the application. Now, the documentation sort of implies, and we'll come to the registration process in a minute, but the documentation sort of implies that if you are a web app, you don't have access to certain APIs. Like specifically when they talk about posting to news feeds, they say, web apps can't do this. Now, I haven't tested that theory, but it's unlikely. But that's just something to keep in mind. So think about when the first thing you make is, what are you doing? Are you presenting information, or are you actually going to have an interactive user experience? Do you want to post scores to somebody's news feed? Do you want to send them notifications? Do you want to send them emails? Now, at this stage, as far as I can tell, almost everything on Facebook is a game of some sort. I expect that to change. Whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or one of the other social networking sites, somebody's going to figure out that this architecture allows you to deliver applications that can do a lot more than you can do on a cell phone. And that's the real power of this, the ability to bring in not just Farmville and games like that, but actual useful applications that people would use for money. Now, this up here is the other thing about Facebook. For the last couple of hours, I have been trying desperately to figure out why the Facebook applications that I wrote to demonstrate for this class stopped working. And that's because that happens at Facebook. So what this is saying here, so what happens is when someone enters your app, if they're logged in, if they're logged in, they do a post and they send you a JSON request that has the authentication information for that user. The JSON information has a signature, and sometimes for reasons which are not apparent, the information which one receives from Facebook does not conform to that signature. So when you are developing your Facebook Facebook applications or web pages, you have to keep in mind that if it's not working and you can't figure out why, it may not be your fault. That's the long and short of it. And those problems will just magically appear and then magically go away. And Facebook will assure you that nothing has happened. Must have been a problem with your code. Now, Facebook, when one reads the Facebook documentation, we're going to develop the site in just a second. When one reads the Facebook documentation, they talk about doing things on the server side with PHP or doing things on the website with JavaScript. I have downloaded the PHP SDK 3 times, and I discovered 2 things. One is the documentation really sucks. And the other one is I'm not smart enough to figure out how to use it, or it doesn't work. So what I ended up doing, and what I think you will probably end up doing, is creating a hybrid application that runs PHP or something on the server side that dynamically constructs your web page, and then delivers a web page which probably contains the appropriate JavaScript fragments. The JavaScript is used almost exclusively to create those annoying Facebook dialogues. Login dialogues, post-email dialogue, all that sort of thing. In most cases, what you do is you call put some JavaScript fragment in there, and you provide a callback URL. And when they click on the button, they will initiate the dialogue, and then that will get redirected to where you want it to go. So, let me just see if the JSON file disappeared. Gotta love these guys. This is not the game I was intending to demo, although this is an interesting game. So, the easiest way to start. Okay, so. That's great, Gene. Yes?
Is that the game or is that a problem?
That depends on who you ask. That is a game. If there are any burned out old hacks here who were programming in the mid-90s, that is a game which you will recognize as Core War. That's actually what it does. It's a very exciting game, but you really have to be a geek. Now there are obviously 2 parts to a Facebook app. Right? One is defining, creating your app, designing it, figuring out all this clever stuff, getting signed up to Facebook. And the other part is writing it. So there are any number of really good editors available for editing HTML pages in JavaScript and PHP. One of the IDEs of which I am personally very fond is called Eclipse. How many Eclipse users do we have in the room?
You count Flex?
Yeah. Flex Bison?
Flash Builder, Flex.
Oh, no, I'm not familiar with that.
They're built on Eclipse as well.
Oh, okay, so there, see, you should have come to my earlier class with the other 4 guys where we talked about how to create a branded IDE with Eclipse. I personally find Eclipse very useful and has a large number of utilities and features that are particularly good for creating advanced applications. As a matter of fact, if one goes to SourceForge, you will discover that last night I created and checked in a project called the Facebook Developers Desktop, which is a branded Eclipse IDE for developing new applications on Facebook. So now you've decided, okay, so first you've decided, okay, I'm going to make a Facebook app, that's cool. I got an HTTPS site, maybe it's a server you got anyway, maybe you're running an illegal server on your Comcast line. They don't seem to shut you down. By some mechanism you have determined that you're going to deploy your Facebook application. And you've decided what kind of application it is. So the easiest kind is a web page. And so the first example we're going to look at is the simplest possible Facebook application. It is a web page that contains some JavaScript, calls a Facebook API, and there's a login button, and if you haven't logged in, it will display one part of your web page, and if you have logged in, it will display another part, a different part of your web page. That's a case where that information is not hidden from the user. In other words, if they were to look at the HTML, they could see whatever it is you're not showing. And it's just it's kind of a game. But as I said, it is the simplest possible Facebook app. Then we will look at the next thing, which is what this is an example of. This is a Facebook application that runs an embedded Java applet. Now, again, one does not need a particularly high-powered IDE to put together a web page with an embedded Java applet. And the reason to do this is very simple. If you actually do a really cool Eclipse application, and you use all of its features, and you got this lovely graphical, you use the visual editor, and you've got all kinds of good stuff, maybe some 3D graphics, that's going to be a Java web launch. And that means the customer's going to get a little pop-up, and it's going to say, do you want to run this application? And you're going to lose 60% of the people at that point. They have absolutely no confidence. The first 30% will leave when they get the warning that says, this is a self-signed certificate because you didn't want to buy one. And they will say, this is a self-signed certificate. We can't guarantee its authenticity. Do you want to proceed? And they will say, no. Then another 60% will leave when they want to do a pop-up because they just don't get it. Now with Java 7, my understanding is Java 7, I haven't played with it yet, but Java 7 actually enables web start apps to be embedded. So one of the possibilities that you have, if that actually works, would be to deploy the JRE with your application, and then you won't lose the 60% that you were going to lose when your application popped up, but you're going to lose 40% of them because it won't take them a year to download. So now this is a pretty standard Eclipse installation. What you want to install is you want to install Eclipse for RCP developers, or you want to install the RCP RAP plugin development toolkit feature. For those of you who aren't aware of it, aren't familiar with it, I'll show you that real quickly what I mean. Something I said. So one downloads Eclipse from Eclipse.org. Click on the download button, and if you go down, you see here Eclipse for RCP RAP developers. Yes?
What's RCP?
RCP is the Eclipse Rich Client Platform. It is everyone knows that Eclipse is a platform, and we're all familiar with taking that, or those of us who use it are familiar with taking that platform, installing plugins, and extending it in various ways. Many of us who have used Eclipse for some period of time recognize, oh look, this is an Eclipse application. We see that all the time in the Flex stuff is Eclipse. Yes?
You already have Eclipse, the default Eclipse. Do you add that component?
Yes, yes. You can go, if you go to the install new software, that's one of the standard features. But this is why nobody's ever heard of it, because if you look here, Eclipse IDE for Java EE developers, 229,000 downloads. Eclipse for RCP, RAP developers, 25,000 downloads. And the longer the release is out, the bigger that delta will get. This is, those of us who use the RCP are very fond of it, but it is a rarefied group. So if you already have Eclipse installed, you can in fact go and then you can die of old age waiting for that list to come up. And when this finishes, I will show you there is a RCP feature that you can install into your existing Eclipse application.
Would that have any conflicts with other plugins? Or
God, I hope not.
is it better to just download a separate version?
I never do. I have never had any trouble with conflicting plugins in Eclipse.
I have.
And I'm not ruling it out. I'm just saying I haven't had that particular experience. Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing more about the ones where you've encountered that. Now, what I have encountered is trouble moving plugins from one release to another. Right, going from Helios to Indigo, I just about died because there was a bunch of things that hadn't been ported.
What's the set you are going to? It's so small, I cannot see.
What's that?
What's the set you are going to now? It's very small.
This is the...
Oh yeah, I know where you are, but what's the set you type in there? Work with.
Nothing, just saying that all.
Oh, up there, that just says all available sites.
Oh, okay.
So you can have, there's a pull-down list there, so you can take a look at particular sites.
You think you could change the resolution? Well, I don't want to screw up your presentation, but
Yeah, I can't see it either.
Right.
That's the play.
Okay. Thank you.
Hang on. Oops.
oh man.
You need a magnifier.
That be better?
That's great. All right.
Well, nice try.
Let's see if we can fumble through with these. That's probably,
Yeah.
that's about as good as it's going to get because I don't feel like rebooting right now because this thing takes forever. And so here you see the various plugins and so on. You can install. And I just have to check and make sure that that's the right one. And here's the feature that one would install. The Eclipse RCP and the plugin developer resources. When you install this stuff, when you move into the world of RCPs, get the source code for everything. You're going to want it. This is also then, the other thing is these target platform components allow you to take that RCP and aside from the world of Facebook applications, create standalone applications for Mac, Linux, Windows, and Solaris using this. So yeah, so to answer your question, yes, you can install this feature. And again, I've never had a conflict, but this is one of the reasons I stay almost always with the Eclipse plugins. So one of the religious wars, for those of you who aren't familiar with open source, there are religious wars. And one of the religious wars has to do with which subversion plugin you use. One is called Subclips, and one is called Subversive. And Subversive is the one produced by Eclipse, and that is therefore the one that I use. I've seen Subclips, and it has some very nice features, but I prefer to stick with Eclipse plugins. Again, they're funded by IBM. Yeah.
Can you skip all that and just use Tortoise SVN? Or do you have to do some of that integration with the subversion to be able to do it?
Oh, I see. So, well now, for instance, if you have the Subversive plugin, you can check out the project directly into the desktop.
Okay.
So, so this one is an example because I'm just populating the tree. But if I were to go and create a workspace, I could check out Facebook for app developers and pull in the whole workspace and everything from within the Eclipse environment. Do the check-in, check-out, merge, change it. They also have Git. And for reasons which are not completely clear, they still bundle CVS. But yeah, pretty much as soon as anybody comes up with a really cool little, particularly a source code thing, either the Eclipse guys pick it up or they push it onto the Eclipse train, because that's how you get traction.
The Eclipse, the core developers?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I have not played with the Git plugin, because I'm a burned out old hackman in the past, so that's the way that goes. So by some mechanism, either by installing the RCP distribution pack, or by taking your current Eclipse and installing the RCP, you get a configured version of Eclipse. Now, the other two things that I install are the web standard tools, the WST, which is, I'm sorry, what was that already? WST, and that includes things like JavaScript editors and HTML editors and a whole bunch of other really cool things. And the PHP Developers Toolkit, which includes the PHP editor and things of that nature. So with those, with the RCP and the WST and the PDT, you have all of the programming tools that you're going to need to create a Facebook application. In a relatively painless way. So the first step in doing any of this is to create an Eclipse project. Now we're going to create a project, and that project is going to contain, we're going to create a project that contains a standalone Eclipse application. And the reason that we're going to do that is eventually we want to export that for web launch and make that a Facebook application so that we can get rid of those 90% of those people and get down to the 10% that we really want using our application. That will also, in that same project, I created a separate package, and I'll create one here, a separate package that contains an applet, and then a folder called web that contains the web pages that drive those. It's not particularly clever, but it's a solution. And then if you download the Facebook Developers Desktop, there is a wizard which will generate a plugin development perspective. One of the things I've noticed is that a lot of people who use Eclipse, even sophisticated folks who use many, many features of Eclipse, don't change perspectives very often. Because when you change perspectives, your menu bars change and all your tools go away and you can't figure out what the hell you're doing. In this particular case, you really want to be in the plugin development environment for this because that enables stuff that isn't there in, for instance, resource. So having switched over to the plugin development perspective, first step is to make a project. And we're going to make a new plug. Yes?
So, I'm sorry, are we developing a plugin, or that's just the configuration of the thing you want to use to create the Facebook app?
See, that implies that there is a rigorous definition of plugin. So, in the context of the Rich Client platform, a standalone application is also a plugin. And that may just be because coming up with a dozen different names for it would just drive everybody nuts. So now you just give it a name. This is the naming convention that I use. It's not particularly bound to it. You may have a special location where you put your files in, depending if you like using ClearCase, you may want to put it in a particular file location. I normally just use the default location. We are going to create a Java project, even if you don't use Java, even if you have no intentions of ever using Java at all in your project, you're going to want to create a Java project. Because if you don't, you will be missing critical pieces of the back end that you will never be able to figure out how to add. So your builders will get screwy. Even if you're using the CDT exclusively, your builders get screwy off all sorts of things. Next, here's where you fill in some information about your product. Those who know me will recognize this number. Give it a name, if you can type it. Here's where you can select your execution environment. I generally just take the default because I'm not smart enough to sort out Java problems when they pop up. So, let me just segue on that for a minute. Eclipse is an excellent platform for those of us who are competent to muddle through in Java but are not a Java programmer. So, what that means is, if you come into my office and you claim to be a C programmer, there's a couple of questions I'm going to ask you, and we're going to very rapidly sort out whether you are actually a C programmer or just someone who can program in C. If I walk into a Java programmer's office, there are corresponding questions that he will answer me that I will not be able to answer, or ask me that I will not be able to answer. So, for instance, I'm not sure what an activator is. I'm sure that I have to have one. There may be 1,000 good reasons you would want to write your own. I don't know what they are, and I don't care. So that's just so that you know, in some cases, I'll be doing things with the Java, and that will be because that is the easiest way to do Java in Eclipse. One thing about Eclipse, as with most tools, Eclipse works best if you use it the way it is intended to be used. If you try to make it be what you want it to be, you will be unhappy. If you want to make it have features that it doesn't have because you think that's the way they should be done, you will be unhappy. Now, the advantage is you can write a whole bunch of plugins and make it have those features. But it's very often, it is most useful to take the defaults. The other side of that is when you're programming and you're generating, we'll come to this in shortly, and they have these templates, they have these wizards. And these wizards are great. They will blast it. You've got the Java EE stuff, man. You give that thing a WSDL and it blasts out the entire SOAP engine, client, everything, the beans, the whole gazette. Blasts out the whole thing. Works like a charm. Does exactly what the demo application is intended to do. It does it cleverly. It is completely unchangeable. Because it leverages every feature and aspect of Eclipse that the Eclipse guys who wrote that template know. And they're not going to tell you. And you discover some interesting things, like it's impossible to get into that menu list. So, that's what I say here. Here you want to take the default. And you create a Java project, mostly, because that's what Eclipse wants you to do. That's the path that they test most thoroughly. That will get all your hooks in place. Now, the most interesting button is here at the bottom of the page. Rich client application. Would you like to create a rich client application? The answer to this question is yes. Now, let me show you what that means. So if I say no, and I go here, I have many, many templates for creating Eclipse plugins. And some of these are really cool, right? Incremental Project Builder, use that extensively. That was how I created the Palm Developers Toolkit. Plug in with a multi-page editor. This will be the core of whatever complex application that you create is. Everything useful in Eclipse is an editor. Now, you might not actually edit things. That's fine. But because it's an editor, it has hooks into, it allows you to save files and load files and share resources and do all kinds of amazing things. So we'll be coming back to those in just a minute. So those are plug-in templates. And if we go back now and we check this, I'd like to create a rich client application. Yes. Now we have a different set of templates. Now this particular release happens to be Indigo SR1. And one of the drawbacks of any SR1 release from Eclipse is they have only a minimal set of templates. There's actually a much richer set in SR2. I haven't looked at Juno yet, but you look at, once a release matures, it's a very rich set of plugins. Or application templates. But in most cases, you probably don't want to use those because it will be very, very difficult to wedge, unless you're going pure Eclipse and you're going to leave that, that's going to do exactly what it does because it does it perfectly. And when you go over here and just have plugins, then you can do that. But in reality, that's not going to be very satisfactory. So I would say, whether developing for Facebook or for anything else, an RCP application with an intro. Because that is the minimum Eclipse standalone application. And then once you've got that, you can build on that, you can add plugins, you can do all sorts of amazing things. So, having said that, let's go here, click next. Now, the static content versus dynamic content has to do with the elements in the intro. It really doesn't make any difference what you check here. Well, actually, it sort of does, but I most often put static content because it's not particularly interesting to me to figure out how to make dynamic content. I'm just not that clever. Give it a product name. Bada bing, bada bing. And now we have created here a Eclipse application. And we can take that application and we can launch it and see how it works. Oh, there's a splash screen. And up comes Eclipse. There we go. We have written a standalone application. You can now export this. You can export it as a binary package installable from ZipperTar. You can make it into a web launch thing. This is our intro, and if you close our intro, you discover that there's nobody home. And in this is your canvas upon which you put your application. You add plugins to this. They might be graphics plugins, they might be editors, they might be any combination of things that run within this framework. Now, once we've done that, once we've created now a project framework and so on and so forth, now we can actually begin to take a look at some of the other things that we would do. Now, so I would normally go in here, and it's actually possible that the Java E squared stuff will do this. But I go in here, I make a new folder. Press the right button. Put the folder in there. Call that web. Go into web. Create a new HTML file. Give it a name. Oops. Select your format. Now again, this depends, like I was talking to a friend of mine that's here today, and he's really interested in getting into HTML5. Right? He thinks HTML5 is going to rock. So he's interested in perhaps doing a Facebook app with HTML5. I take 401 transitional because that's the default and I don't really care. Well, you know, at some point, you have to decide, right? How much novelty do you want to take on? You know, if you want to experiment with HTML5 and do something that is sort of vaguely interesting and you can stand around the coffee pot and talk to your friends about it, work, okay, then an HTML5 Facebook app may be the perfect fit. Yeah.
Well, I mean, at this level, if there's like 10 lines in there, how much of a difference does it make?
Well, there you go. Well, but it's not going to stay that way. This is not, except perhaps for some of us, what you might consider a comprehensive web-based application. But it's a framework, it's in the right place, it's got an HTML editor that is pretty good, it supports formatting so you don't have to go find tidy. It'll let you know if you've got, you know, give you alerts on tags and whatnot, so on and so forth. You might want to go XML in here. This is, if your application, like Core Wars, it turns out, Core War has a number of XML files that it uses. I use the same technique to create the XML files for that. So, then, once you have done that, the easiest thing to do is to switch over to the other application that you've already written and open that up to demonstrate. Oops, not the web start after you guys. And this JavaScript comes right off the Facebook developers page. Matter of fact, we'll go there just shortly. So, okay, I'm not above using Titan. And what you see here is this. This comes from Facebook. And this, at least up to here, seems to be what you must have. Facebook has a JavaScript SDK which they want you to load and execute asynchronously. So that sort of, I'm not sure exactly how they do that, but I suspect it involves a hidden window somewhere and some page running JavaScript that they can call into. I mean, once you've got them there. So that is the anchor of what you're going to do. And then as a result of this async init, as a result of the async, you can now listen for events. And you'll get notified when those events happen. So here we happen to go, okay, we're going to listen for an auth status change. And if we get an auth status change, we're going to call this function. Now this function could be declared separately. You can have your own JavaScript library, loaded in the normal way. It's pretty common. And this function will be called when that event happens. If it's an auth response, then this API will return true and set this value to your name. And then it will go down and it will find an element whose ID is logged out and set its display to none, and find an ID whose name is logged in and change this display to blocked. And if you go down the page, what you discover is that genius of genius, there are two div tags. One is called auth logged out, and one is called auth logged in. Good.
Will this work with, will you be able to pull in like JavaScript frameworks like YUI or jQuery?
Should be able to do anything.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it's, again, Facebook is not hosting your application. Facebook does not care what you do on your web page. They really don't.
As long as it's HTTPS.
As long as it's HTTPS URL. That code is never going to hit an FB server.
Okay.
That's going to go from your HTTPS repository direct to the customer's browser. It's not even going to pass through Facebook.
But that chunk of JavaScript at the top gives you access to the Facebook.
To the Facebook API, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, this, point on my screen, this one. So this, by some mechanism, causes that to be loaded. I haven't gone through and sorted out what this stuff does. I would have sort of expected that to be in line instead of a function don't care. And I do know this part causes that to be loaded. Possibly a hidden window is launched. And then it executes. Just dropping like flies.
You have a unique app ID up there.
Yes. Yeah, well, I'm going to leave this page just as soon as I get through that, and we're going to go to the developer, the Facebook developer site, where one becomes a Facebook developer, and then that will show how you obtain that ID. But yeah, the app ID, when you create a Facebook application, they give you an app ID and a secret, an app secret. And those are used as part of the authentication process. Both to authenticate the application itself, as well as to authenticate the user. That's the other nice thing, which is in many systems, your authentication relies on the user authentication. Does the user have these privileges? Can the user do this? And so on. Facebook API, you have user authorizations in which allows the user to approve it, for instance, posting to their news feed, as well as application authorizations which say, I want to update his graph data, send him a notification, whatever. But yeah, that is assigned by Facebook, and it is probably an extraordinarily bad idea to leave it embedded in your application. A number of the samples, both PHP, which is not so visible, but the JavaScript, a number of the samples have the AppSecret and AppID embedded. I'm not big on security, but that's a possibility to exploit. If somebody has access to your AppSecret and AppID, then they can do anything that they want as long as the authorized user is logged in. So, as I said, you probably don't want to put it in there unless you can, unless you really, really, really have to. And then here, yeah, again, here's where you see where we just changed the display. We set when you get your bad JSON response. The bad JSON response includes an OAuth token, which you'll be providing with subsequent queries. And so you store that, or you clear it, and then just change what displays and doesn't display. And this is what I was talking about, where if you actually had something that you didn't want somebody to see, unless they were logged in, this would be a bad idea, because all they have to do is look at your HTML, look at the frame source, and they've got it right there. But it's good for, like my app. Show you how that's used. I use that on mine.
Visibility instead of display.
What's that?
I think that there is a difference if you use visibility or display attributes in a...
It could be. So here you see that there is nothing displayed on that page when you're logged out. And then if I log in, although in this particular case the applet isn't there, but the thing that pulls the applet is there. Now, here is a little trick that I will share with you. You might want to think about. So what I do is this. Facebook. HTTPS. SourceForge. So what happens is the user requests the app. We verify the user. And we respond with an HTTP other. Now this is actually important, because if you do a redirect, their browser will cache that and they won't hit your auth resource again, and they will eventually have auth problems. But by replying with an HTTP other, replying with an HTTP other, now they will go here to fetch content. And since SourceForge, since that's an HTTP site, and SourceForge is a free hosting provider, and they don't care about bandwidth, they're very happy. They love to have people downloading stuff from SourceForge, and I am happy to assist them. So this is an example where I use Facebook authentication as a means of authenticating a user's access to my SourceForge repository. Although it doesn't say that exactly in the description. And then, of course, they can do whatever they want here, right? They're like, I don't care. Just use all the bandwidth you want. For other than the most trivial games, it is hard to imagine a useful application that does not have some sort of complex backend. How complex you make it, that's up to you. Depends on how smart you are. This, I can assure you, was a pain in the ass to code. But that's primarily because SourceForge really doesn't want me running a game server. Really, they don't. But, you know, they didn't pack a lunch that day. But anyway, here's how the simplest form of Facebook web app works. And if I log in again, the game will load and become visible. And so that is how this fragment works. That is exactly what it does. And that is really what you get from the Facebook SDK. That ability to control access by means of their authentication. The associated ability to get user information. Because once the user gives you permission, you've got their first name, you've got their last name, you've got their picture, you've got the names of their friends, you've got their email address. You can just annoy them in dozens and dozens of ways. And you don't have to track all of that, right? You don't have to create a MySQL database and figure out the schema and store the stuff and put in the PHP backends and all the things that go with that. You can leverage that from the Facebook engine. And so, that being said, let's take a look at exactly how one begins to do that. No, it doesn't. It used to. So the site you go to is developers.facebook.com. You sign up as a developer separate from Facebook. It is not clear to me whether it is required to be a Facebook member in order to become a Facebook developer. However, if you are a Facebook developer and not a Facebook member, you can't actually execute your application other than inside the test sandbox. So there's a kind of a limited utility to that. And here you can see this section is for putting stuff on your website. Log in with Facebook, like, share, the stuff that you see out there. This is for Facebook to pretend that they have some sort of strategy for mobile. So it's the same sort of things, right? It's the same sort of things one might do on a website, except for a mobile environment. Haven't looked at it. I don't do cell phones as a hobby. Build apps on Facebook. So now I'm going to sign out, and we will go through the product. So, is there anyone in the room who has a Facebook account and wants to become a Facebook developer? Come here. You got your phone with you? Okay.
It's a Windows mobile phone.
They're going to send you a text message that you have to confirm your identity with you. If you want to come sign up, we'll get you signed up as a Facebook developer right now, and that way we can show exactly how it works.
Can you, meantime, go again over the HTTP other thing? I'm not sure.
So, HTTP, HTML. Most of us are familiar with the redirect, the ability to redirect a page. There are two kinds. First name, last name, email, password.
But I already have a Facebook account.
It doesn't matter. No, you do have, even though you already have a Facebook account.
I use a different email address then?
Nope, same one.
Okay.
What you're doing is you're enrolling in the Facebook Developers Program. And the reason you use the same email is because in order to do that, you have to provide a mobile phone number that they can text you at. Because there's only supposed to be one of you. So I actually had to go buy a disposable mobile phone. Okay, if you're going to keep me from doing what I want to do, you have to be ready. You have to do. Yep. I can unplug that if you really don't want to tell. We can guess your sex.
So, what kind of redirect do you use there?
So there's the permanent redirect, the temporary redirect, and there is another command called other. And that is a form of redirection that says, go here now. But the browser does not cache it as a redirect. So the next time they hit that URL, they will go to the original destination.
And how do you execute it? With the,
It's a return code. It's just like you would return
200 OK?
Yeah, just like you would return 200 OK or what's
I know
redirect?
the 301 redirect.
Yeah.
That's the one?
No, it's actually other.
It's a C other?
Yeah. 303.
303?
Yeah, and then you return the URL in the body, right? And then the browser takes that and it goes to that URL. It's exactly identical to a redirect, except a redirect, the next time the browser hits that URL, will go there automatically. This will come back to your URL, you return the other and send them there. Right? That's how you keep them coming back to here for verification.
Instead of going directly to
Instead of going directly to
next
here.
one. Next time.
Right, because if they go here, I have no, if I just do a redirect, I have no idea whether or not I have to put in a whole authorization scheme down here now to go, oh, is this guy logged in, blah, 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 do I have his token, yada, 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 right? I go, no, you came in here, I got your token, I know you're authorized, I know you're logged into Facebook, I do this, you go here, and the URL passes in.
But I thought that the other window over there is also in SourceForge, only some kind of iframe inside Facebook or something like that.
No. Facebook is not hosting anything. This is SourceForge does not support HTTPS. If they did, I would have done it all on SourceForge, but they don't support. That was my original plan.
So you're using two different machines?
Yeah.
So what machine do you use for the HTTPS?
I think that's running on my AWS instance. Because AWS will give you a server for a year for free.
Including SSL certificate.
Yeah, it's your server. It's your server. You install Apache. No, you got to get the certificate from somebody.
Self-signed or?
If you do a self-signed certificate, and then just
It will still.
you'll get the warning,
I see.
right? And that's the thing that will frighten off. Again, depends on the nature of your app.
Actually, I think that there is one provider that gives you a certificate for free.
Could be.
Ava, I couldn't make it work.
Oh, okay. So in that case, we'll just lie. Okay.
See other, that's what everyone's in the C.
Are you sure? So what did you do with all? Oh, God. So now, once you sign up, and again, so what happens is you sign up on that page, you have to have a mobile phone where they can text you. They will not call you by voice, they will not do anything, they will not allow multiple users to register with the same mobile phone number. It's one of the things they do to make sure that there's just one of you. So they've got their own did you get your question answered about the other?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and so, actually, this is particularly clever. I had to work very hard. The guys at SourceForge worked very hard to keep me from running a server on their machine. I had to work very hard to get past them. There's some good guys there. So once you get in there, you put in your mobile phone, they send you a text with a confirmation code. If you put in the confirmation, if you use a cell phone number that you've already used, and you click OK, they go, oh, that's fine, that's nice. And then later on, when you go to create an application, they go, you haven't been authorized. And in order to get authorized, in order to have two people using the same mobile cell phone, and Facebook developers, you have to send them a copy of your photo ID.
Yeah.
So, as I said, now, it could have fixed the photo ID, but it was cheaper to just go buy a disposable cell phone. Yeah, I knew I should have kept some of those call phones. But once you have been authenticated, then you're off into the wonderful world of Facebook. Now, this Getting Started page is actually a good page to get started with, surprisingly enough. Now, the quality of Facebook documentation leaves something to be desired. But they make up for it by having the SDK mostly unstable. So, if it doesn't work anyway, then the out-of-date documentation doesn't matter as much. One does a great deal of data mining in this, trying to sort through and go, oh, what works, what sort of seems like this, so on and so forth. Now, the API that you'll be working with is well, since there's no real standard for what a REST API is, it is hard to say that a given API is or is not a fully qualified REST API. In general, it is a REST API that conforms to CRUD. Does everybody know what that means? Everybody know?
Create, read, update, and delete.
Right. Those are the four operations that they conform. So when one is creating something on Facebook, there is a post, and that everything is addressed as a resource. So they do a post to you. They hit They hit a directory, they don't hit an endpoint. There's no, like, they don't call a create function, right? REST doesn't do that. REST, there's an endpoint, you post the data to it, and you get back to 201 and an instance is created. That instance can be used for other references. So I actually did the same sort of thing on my side. I thought, and you might want to do this because here's what's going to happen. So the sequence goes like this. Here's the FB user. And they do a get. They go visit your app. And here is your application. And over here, that lovely JavaScript says, you're not logged in. So they do a Facebook, there's a Facebook login button. And that part of the arguments to that is a redirect. What Facebook calls a redirect URL, which should not be confused with an HTTP redirect. Right? What happens is, when the user gets done logging in, they're going to call that. They're going to call this URL, and then log in. So that goes approved, and then they do a post of the signed request. And over here, you parse the signed request. And again, you can validate that by any number of ways, right? You know who sent it and so on and so forth. And you verify that that the JSON is good. And they've got code that shows you how to do that. They do the post. You return a 201. They then load your app. Into that iframe that we saw earlier. So what I ended up doing on this side is, I'm confident one could do it with JavaScript, but there is a common there's a common PHP utilities floating all over the net called restutils.php. And that is a PHP library, I think it's 150 lines long, that gives you a very, very nice REST API for this site. It'll handle the post, it'll handle the gets, it'll handle the puts, it'll handle the deletes. You don't have to worry about that. It'll send result codes. It takes care of that housekeeping for you.
What's it called?
Restutils.php. Let me. I showed you this already. So now if you go to SourceForge, you will find the tools and things that I referred to in this SourceForge project. All of the stuff that I did in my classes this weekend is up on SourceForge, including RESTutils. The version of RESTutils I have up there actually has the decode JSON thing in it. So when a post comes in, it goes, oh, did you send me a signed request? Yes, you did. Is it a valid signed request? Yes, it is, and if it's not, it puts that little thing up that we saw earlier that says bad signed JSON request. So that's just something to get sort of used to, is dealing with that. If you're not working with REST now, it is a really good opportunity. thinking about changing jobs and you want to demonstrate competence with REST, Facebook applications that use it are an excellent way to do that.
But then you're gonna go, what do you know about REST? And then you go, well, I made this Facebook application and it does this cool thing here. And they go, wow.
Actually really does work. So you go here and you select the area in which you're interested. Here it's apps on Facebook. And here's a brief introduction. Blah, 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 blah. Now, they talk about the canvas. So this area in here where the application is displayed, that iframe is what they refer to as the canvas. Now, as I said before, you can make this fixed. Say you want it to be 300 by 100 or whatever, or you can make it variable. I consume 100% because I'm not quite done with this yet, and I haven't figured out how much landscape I'm going to need. I may end up moving this into there, but that's a whole other discussion. Maybe I'll do that next year. So that's the canvas. And then once you've got that particular bit of genius down, then it's just all the cool stuff you can do, right? Add to favorites and do notifications. See, you can annoy people with these little pop-ups here. Yeah, see, you can do this, you can get into their news feed, you can annoy their friends, you can post their winning scores, you can remind them that it's their birthday. Just do all sorts of just amazing and fun things. And that, you know, then you should probably get out more. So, having decided, okay, we're just going to get started. So the first thing is we're going to go here, click on the apps page, and this is one of the things about Facebook, particularly developer things, is that I don't know if it's their caching or what, but it is not at all uncommon, particularly on a developer site, to be unable to get back to where you want to be. So I think I'm going to have to reboot my laptop before I will be able to actually get back to my main apps display page. This is just currently showing the last. You just have to get used to it. Right? The ability to deal with these problems is what separates Facebook developers from everybody else.